I'm just really grateful to have a really thoughtful group of folks who are going to explore what a different model might look like. There's often power dynamics and things that we deal with, and so we're going to explore that a little bit. And then very excited to have National Geographic explorer, author, journalist, Madison resident, longtime Madison resident and friend, James Edward Mills, who's going to share some reflections for us. So with that, I'd like to introduce Onika Abraham Lee, who is the fearless leader of the Blue Sky Funders Forum, to join us here to get us kicked off on this next panel. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Oh, the power that has been unleashed in this room is overwhelming, overwhelming. From the incredible presentation of Samantha to the powerful and brave and needed voice of this audience, thank you. Power is uncomfortable. Talking about power brings discomfort to everyone, those who hold it and those who don't, and those who think they hold it and those who think they don't. And that is really what we're coming to this panel today to talk about. We're talking about power. And I want to just give everyone an opportunity to take a big breath. Because you might not think you have it, but the people who are going to come on this panel right now are going to show you the multiple ways that community is inhabiting that power and using it to move, not mountains, but movements, to move movements. So thank you for that. Again, my name is Onika Abraham Lee. I don't feel exactly fearless right now, but I'm 11 months into my position in leading Blue Sky Funders Forum, which is an organization that brings together more than 40 different philanthropic organizations that all care very deeply about investing in thriving communities by advancing connections to nature and the outdoors and outdoor access, and so much of the work that y'all do here. So these foundations come together to move more money towards these efforts. And in doing so, they're building communities by building capacity within the organizations that many of y'all represent. But what we know about philanthropy and about power in general is that it's often shifting. And so I want to ask everyone here to raise your hand if you've ever written a grant. If you're writing a grant right this minute on your phone. Okay, it happens. If you've ever sat on a grant review panel, right? Some of you are raising your hands to both of those things, right? If you've ever been a program officer and a staff person at an organization, right? Okay. So within those dynamics, there's a lot of shifting of power. In one moment, you might be deciding who gets the money. In another moment, you might be asking for the money. And in all of those transactions, all of those roles, there is an exchange of power. And so we want to talk today about two groups of folks that have been sitting on all different ends of the spectrum and talk to them about what it means to look bravely at those power dynamics and then to work to dismantle them. So with that, I'm going to invite up our panelists. We are really lucky to have with us Akiima Price. Akiima is the interim executive director of Friends of Anacostia Park, and her work is supported by the Outdoor Foundation, which is represented by executive director Lesford, Duncan. Come on up. Thank you, Akiima and Les. And we're also going to be hearing from Priya Cook, who works for Children in Nature Network. And her work is supported by the Kresge Foundation and many other foundations, represented by Executive Director Program Officer Alexa Bush. Thank you so much for joining us. So we are going to move forward with this premise that there are power imbalances in philanthropy and that they impact the ways that we grow our movement connecting children to nature. One way of addressing power is to think about power mapping. And in power mapping, we usually start by asking two key questions. One is, what do people value? What do people value? And then who controls access to what people value? And that creates power. And then we can map that across the ecosystems that we work within. And so I thought a really good way into this question, into introducing our panelists and having them introduce themselves, is to ask what they value and how that's brought them into the work that they're doing now. So I'm going to start with the person closest to me, Alexa. If you'll share a little bit about what you value and how that brought you into this work.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning. I'm Alexa, coming to you today. I work primarily in Detroit, Michigan. I think for me, that city has been really central to everything that I've done. I didn't grow up in the city, but come from 3 generations of folks who did. And I think for me, thinking about, my great-grandfather moved from Alabama up to the north, and the way that in that time, for him, the opportunities of Detroit became a way of economic mobility. I think a lot about the value of how do we, and Detroit isn't doing that in that same way at the moment, how do we create opportunities for people to have those chances and to really be able to access a thriving and healthy life for themselves, for their families, and really for all of us. Because I don't think we all win when people aren't able to have the tools to succeed.
Thank you, Alexa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Priya Cook, and thanks for this question, Onika. And it actually follows up on what Alexa said. There's a lot of resonance there, because the thing that came to mind when I thought about my values, and one that really shines in our work here, is just thinking about the idea of collectivism and connectedness. And as a South Asian woman, this is kind of a lens that I grew up with. It shows up in the meaning of family, in our relationship with nature and with ecosystems, and the work of my family, growing and being farmers in India. And I think it's really something that shows up a lot in this work about movements and partnerships. And so I think when we work on things like a Green Schoolyards action agenda, or we are trying to support national partners and local partners who are championing the work, really as a huge ecosystem. A couple conferences ago, or last conference, Jose Gonzalez stood up on our stage and was talking about creating a thriving meadow. And that's kind of the picture in my mind of thinking about the connectedness between everything that we're doing, but also acknowledging that collaboration and coordination and that sense of connection don't just appear. We're extremely diverse and rich in our diversity, and that this topic of our panel today around trust and trust building is a really key piece of what makes that work and forges that connection that we have with each other.
Thank you.
Is this thing on?
Yeah.
The first thing that came to mind, I promise you I'm not trying to be funny, but nature. Honestly, when I came up, little rough situations, everybody said their things, but adverse childhood experiences are I think create the biggest health problem we have now, public health issue we have, because it comes down to the mental health and just the trauma. And so when I first, again, not trying to be dramatic, but when I first learned about the mid-Atlantic slave trade, like when I thought about people coming over on ships, it disturbed my spirit, and it still does. But because I feel like the work I do around these people, they're children that are hungry. Like, granted, there are children and people suffering everywhere. The community I live in, where I've grown up, what I've seen specifically in the Black community and how crack impacted families, and how as an early environmental educator, I worked with the bad kids. But honestly, there are some kids who behavior is influenced by them being brought up as grown little kids. And so it comes in their attitudes, and they're sassy, and they're, you know, and they have these learning challenges because their parents aren't reading with them. So when people don't rewind the tape on that, you know, that's what I try to do, is try to help give people these experiences or opportunity for connection. So nature, I thought of love, because I think what comes out of when you're able to heal and truly be a human being, the normal kid who can laugh. Like I'm giving you too much information. I was at a cookout the other day, and I got to witness these kids playing. They were going up against, they were safe. There was a village around them. These were all black children and black families, but I know other communities where I would never see that happen, and how I witnessed so many broken children. And I see how powerful nature is for them, that I value nature in a way that it's helped me heal. And God, I can't believe what the hell is going on? The power! The power. No, but that's my answer, because it does it for me too, because I go right across the Bay Bridge and get reset every time. So nature is also a thing that I seek out. I tattoo it on my body. Like I believe in it, so nature is my value.
Thank you.
We can stop that. I mean, that's real. Good morning, everyone. I'm calling response. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Les, Duncan, pronouns he, him. And I would say that the value that I hold most dearly is the value of joy. And I think it gets to what Akiima was saying as well. I think that there is a shortage, a deficit of joy in this world, and that's that's the root of what most of us are doing. Right? We're cultivating joy building, joy creating experiences for youth, for children, for families, for communities in nature and in the outdoors. I dared to, on Monday as I was flying in, to wear my favorite t-shirt that says "Black Joy is Revolutionary." And it's a bit of a social experiment, unfortunately. I don't know why. As I'm walking through the airport, looking at people give me different reactions to something that I think is a pretty simple statement. Black joy is revolutionary. Some are giving that face like, all joy is revolutionary. Yeah? Joy is so fundamental to what we do, to who we are. It allows us to be more interconnected. It allows us to experience mental health benefits, physical health benefits, and it allows us to also enter into some of the critical conversations that we need to have as a society with an openness or a fullness of heart. The Rwandan saying of ubumuntu, right? That greatness of heart. That is really what joy does. And so I hold that closely and dearly in times where the world seems bleak, but that we still have to lean into and show up for this work.
Oof. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you all. The diversity of the things that you value and also the connectedness of all of those is really powerful for me as well. And just leaving on the idea of joy, I recently heard the reading of a poem by Drew Lantham, and it's called "Joy is the Justice We Give Ourselves," which I just want y'all to sit with, especially as we get into a lot of the disparities that we're going to talk about today. So there's a lot of different types of power that were just lifted up here, things that are valuable: community, love, joy. Each of these things translates into a kind of power that we have: relational power, there's community power, there's people power, and there's economic power. And when we're talking about philanthropy, we're often talking about economic power, and for good reason. There is a lot of money there, right? So I'm going to give you some statistics that some of you might know and some of you may not. So in the United States, there are more than 125,000 foundations, philanthropic organizations, and they have assets in the, as of 2023, $1.2 trillion of assets, $1.2 trillion of assets holding within those 125,000 foundations. Total giving is $90 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, especially if you're running an organization with a budget of less than $1 million. However, that leaves $1.1 trillion still within the coffers of these foundations every year, and that's reinvested. But it doesn't go into the hands of organizations like many of ours that are doing this work on the ground, and that is legal. That's a structural thing that is happening that many smart thinkers are also thinking about dismantling. That's not exactly what we're going to get into on this panel, however, but I want us to sit within the reality of what philanthropy is and that what we're working within right now. Another thing that's an example of systemic power disparities is lest you look at this panel and think that this is the face of philanthropy in general, that is very black and brown, you would be misled. Currently, 92% of U.S. foundation presidents are white, and 83% of full-time executive staff are white. 68% of program officers are white. It's a overwhelmingly white profession. And more than 40% of the U.S. population is not white. And with most recent findings, this is articles from Chronicle of Philanthropy, 7% of total grant making is directed to benefit communities of color, only 7%, and we make up 40% of the population. So there are clear disparities here that have existed for some time, and it was worse some years ago. But these are symptoms of structural racism that still exists in our society today. And these institutions that some of the of our panelists represent are part of this system, but they also are individual institutions where they can make intentional practices to shift power and make real change possible. Through their own policies, through their practices, through recruitment, governance, and grant making. So it's a place where some of these structural changes are really difficult and take laws. But the ways that it shows up in our institutions, we can make a difference. So for the panelists, I really want you to share how systemic and institutional power imbalances impact your work, and how you've experienced institutions like foundations shifting power and building trust to really counteract some of the statistics I just shared. I think Les, you're up first now.
Thanks so much, Onika.
Yeah.
Where to dive in?
I don't know.
We've had some really good discussions around this, and this has been an ongoing conversation across not only the field of philanthropy, but the field of nonprofits and community-based organizations. While I serve as the executive director of the Outdoor Foundation, I come from a career background working in public management, nonprofits, and really helping to address issues of equity, both in health and human services, and now in outdoor recreation, environmental justice. And one of the things that I would kind of kick off this conversation with saying is that colonialism and the exploitation of the global South over centuries has led to the conditions that we live in today. Right? The global campaign, and we're not just talking about the past, over the past couple of centuries. We're talking about centuries of this campaign has really led to where we are today, all for BIPOC-led organizations and equity-focused organizations across the country to have to complete grant proposals, as we talked about earlier today, that demonstrate the need and why they are worthy for funding and for investment within communities, right? We are all here to rectify a global wrong in a very specific niche, in a very specific sector that we work within, but all focused on that. To kind of give some context, so colonialism and systemic extraction of wealth for centuries, not only here in the United States, but around the world, under the premise of manifest destiny and under the premise of religious condonement, has brought us here. And then America was then built on the backs of Black and Indigenous people, people of color, and in ways that we still have not received true and full reparations for. And then fast forward a little bit further, We see the systemic harm that was caused by redlining in communities that have created many of the environmental justice issues that we see today. The lack of access to nature, the lack of access to green space within communities. And then you amplify that with the proliferation of messages about who belongs in the outdoors, and who does and does not belong in the outdoors. And so this work is difficult. This work is hard, and I think we'll talk very transparently. From the standpoint of philanthropy, the Outdoor Foundation, we are the philanthropic arm of the outdoor industry. So we serve a very unique role to advance the collective industry's interest of increasing participation, but over our past 24 years of existence have really honed in on what does that mean to increase participation if it's not equitable, right? What does that mean to increase participation if we're not addressing some of the systemic barriers? And so over the past 5 years of our existence, we've shifted our model from a model of direct philanthropic giving specifically to individual programs. That work is still very critical and very important. We work alongside many other funders in this space to do that. But we shifted the model to address many of the systemic injustices through a collective impact approach to addressing equity issues or equitable access to nature in the outdoors. Over the past 5 years, 13 communities have come together through multi-year sustained investments in communities and leveraging of resources. Communities have been able to amplify the great work that they're already doing. And we recognize that we're coming in and supporting and bolstering that work. And so excited to be a small part of a broader movement, again, to rectify some of those historic wrongs.
So what he's talking about is DC Thrive. Well, Thrive. they do this Thrive initiative where in those cities, and DC came on 2 years ago. We're going to our second year now. But they came to us. I was identified to be the director of that initiative to kind of essentially bring together a network of partners who are already doing this work, but then ultimately addressing access barrier issues. So in DC, we don't have a shortage of parks. Kids don't have a problem getting to the parks. It comes down for the safety and tone of the communities, the environmental injustices that aren't necessarily the smoke-blowing buildings, but are still the kids that are in generational poverty, public housing, where there's high gun violence rates, blah, blah. So what your money is allowing is what I was going to say. For me, I've been in the field for 30 years, and I've been working at nonprofits, and I've been that person where, so for example, I was at this place, and I remember this girl. Again, I hate to be so dramatic. I promise you I'm not lying, too. She was a little girl, and she had hygiene challenges, and so quite naturally, the other kids in our culture, they Joan. They just put it out there, and obviously it hurts her feelings. I'm talking to her, finding out what her issues are. Her father, her uncle's raising her because her mother's in jail, but it's a bunch of men in the house. And she's sharing a washcloth with her uncle. Blew my mind, right? So I go to my job and I say, hey, could we have little bags that have soap, tissue, sanitary napkins? Y'all hear me? Little things like that. And they were like, well, that's really not our job, and that's what our money can't pay for that. Because I also learned early on that money can't pay for food. And if you're on the ground, y'all know food and snacks are a great incentive, and or some people are legitimately, honestly hungry, right? So this funding allows me to pay for food. It allows me to be innovative and meet people where they are and try and do things, and it counts. Because for so long in my career, I was, again, didn't respect, wouldn't give me the money for the bags, but when the funders came, who do you think they brought them to? I'm watching all, and I knew they were rich. This one lady one time had this ring on her finger. I was like, so the money, I wasn't even aware of how much money was really out there and how much these organizations I was working so hard for and making, I guess at that time it was not a lot of money, but again, the inequity there. But it's just kind of like I didn't realize how much money was out there. And so when I did get to the place, that mid-level where I was writing grants and so forth, and it was good, but I've never been able to have this type of autonomy in program development because I'm able to really be community responsive. I'm on national park land, I'm doing it through, so I'm a I founded the Friends of Anacostia Park, and I'm acting executive director now. But I don't want to be the executive director. It helps me to not be a part of that, one, because I don't want to ever have founder syndrome and be, bring that. But I also want to be able to stand to the side and continue to link it. Because now what's happening with Thrive, so the other side was we had this network of people who were kind of the traditional folks that were at the table that they themselves struggle with the connections with the community. And so in this network, I'm bringing in social workers, youth probation officers, counselors, mothers who've lost their kids to gun violence, like every and anyone who believes in the power of specifically Anacostia Park Parks. But we provide through experiences the opportunity to test out theories. So we're having I'm not gonna start because I think that's a simple question, but I'm working to connect kids that have like the shooters, like the kids who actually are high risk through their probation officers and people who they already have to spend time with and maybe have been dodging. And I'm not expecting to get a whole bunch. And I know there's a probation officer that's taking a kid fishing somewhere, but having it happen at a rate where we can build the capacity of the people that do that, the awareness, document the best practices, share them where it's more of a norm for that to be happening. And because I'm seeking out mental health or just behavior, like mind shifts, which again, you're talking about generational poverty. It's not gonna change overnight, but nature, I believe, has the transformative power of hosting fellowship, a variety of fellowships, where people are spending time together and healing their relationships and or themselves. So I don't know if I answered your question or not. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
I think you did. I think you did answer the question because what I was thinking about, I've been really grounded here in a couple things that have happened at this conference in the last couple of days that I think relate to what both of you said. So some of you were able to attend a presentation yesterday by our colleague Rob Grunwald, who wrote a paper on the economic benefits of green schoolyards. And one of the small, pretty well understood by economists side notes there was just that markets don't reward or invest in things that produce broad benefits for society. And so, as I was thinking about the story you're telling, Akiima, and what I'm guessing a large proportion of the people in this room do, again, I couldn't see the hands before. Who works at a nonprofit in this room? Yeah, so I think that a lot of the work that you all are doing is working in those gaps that are created in our current economic system, which is, a colonial legacy, right? And it is, you are working to fill the spaces and do the things that, frankly, are common sense and produce widespread benefit. And so I think your story is about those gaps, Akiima, and it's about filling that. And I think to be working in those gaps is to be working in a fairly tenuous space because you are reliant upon individuals and organizations that have the wealth and the resources and the desire to fund that work. And so, another moment I'm thinking about in this conference was when our partner at the JPB Foundation, Jen Patrick, said to her funder colleagues, we ourselves have to start working in the gaps. We can't just say, well, I only work, this money is only for environment, this money is only for health. And so I think that's a really powerful call to action for the resources to match the work that's happening in those kind of spaces.
Yeah, just to build on that, because your point about the food just so deeply resonates with me. I'm newer into philanthropy. I've been in my role for a little over 2 years and worked in the public sector prior to that, where I felt like resources were highly putative, like, oh, you can only buy this and not that, and then to do this, you have to procure it, and that takes 4 weeks, and then you have to go to city council, and then you're there to yell. Like, it's so hard to do certain things by design, right? Like Les, you talked about these systems that we live in that are like oppressive on purpose. Because if you're spending all your time running around, like trying to figure out how to get snacks at your event, you are not doing other work that adjusts the systems that are being sustained, right? Like it's a very real thing that we're facing. Sorry. Where, you know, this might sound really odd, but one of the things we talked about prior, our managing director, Wendy Jackson, who's amazing on our Detroit program, always talks to us as program officers as well about, like, don't lead with the money. Which you're like, you're a funder, that's ridiculous. You are the funder, you bring the money. But I think it's for a couple reasons. One, like, I just want to be very clear that the work you all are doing every day isn't charity, right? Like, I think there's this really toxic way that philanthropy is like, oh, charity, like, Priya, good job. Here's $10. Good luck with your event. See you later. And like, I feel really good. Like, I gave Priya $10. Like, you know, like, it's like, no, then Priya had to like put it on her own credit card and use her own car and like bring her intern with her. Like, that charity mindset, I think, is really dangerous. And in that, I think, like, what our team tries to think about is like, how do we actually try to build relationships? Because there are other things that we can probably offer as a foundation than money. That might be access to certain people in our network. That might be, you know, the ability to like call the mayor's office and get attention in a way that, like, I don't agree with, right? Like, I don't like that that's how it works, but can I use that power toward very different ends and in different ways? Where I think if you get beyond just the transaction and just the money, it might open up a space. And it also might show you, as hard as it might sound, like maybe not all money is good money for what you're trying to do. If you're getting yourself into a situation, values-wise, resource-wise, energy-wise, that just isn't working toward the joy and amazing things that Akiima, as you guys said, that are just resonating with me.
Thank you so much. Oh, you see why we have these panelists up here, right? There are real incredible thinkers about how we are shifting models and concepts around charity. What is charity? What is actual social service that we need to invest in? And these mindset shifts are critical. While our access to influence over systemic and institutional power can be somewhat limited sometimes, and we just heard incredible examples of how institutional shifts have been made by these two foundations around thinking beyond the check, thinking about long-term investment in communities, thinking about how do we build these relationships so that we don't have to ask every 5 minutes for every little thing, and is this okay, is this in the budget? There's a lot of trust in there. Those are institutional practices that have been shifted by these foundations, and it's critical to this work we're talking about. But there's also ways that we can have personal relational power that we can flex. And it's how we treat each other, how we exercise interpersonal relationships in the work that we're doing. So I'd love to have our panelists speak more about the ways you've been able to acknowledge, leverage, and share power within your own relationships with each other, and maybe with other funders and grantees, if that feels good as well, either within this particular role that you're in right now or in other portions of your career, but those interpersonal dynamics, what you can move and shift within relationship. I want to start in the middle this time. Are you okay with that, Priya? Yeah.
Sure. Unless you want it. All right. So I want to start actually first with, because you just said something about relationships, and it really is about people at the end of the day. We're people who represent organizations and do work, but we're people. And so Alexa and I actually had a really beautiful way of meeting, which was I was supporting the city of Dearborn in their Green Schoolyards team, and Alexa was also supporting that team as a consultant. And so in that space, we were both getting acquainted, kind of strategizing with this team, trying to offer intel that we each had. And what was so important was we were both in this space, I think, of learning. We were both co-learners together supporting this team. And then later on, the Kresge Foundation began to support our work in Detroit and Michigan, and the teams on the ground there that are really trying to transform public schoolyards and build a statewide network that can support policy activity that helps those local leaders. And so I didn't come to know Alexa as a funder I needed to impress, and I needed to figure out what she wanted to hear from me. You know, we started out in a place of learning and thought partnership, and if I'm remembering correctly, like doing coffee runs to funding.
Like we definitely picked up sandwiches, like left it to her, like we're gonna go pick up the sandwich, I think in my car.
Yes, yeah, with all the car seats and all the
car
family
seats,
stuff.
it was
Yes.
raining. We were like, we're gonna get all these sandwiches so that all the teachers and the mayors can keep talking. Like this is gonna be really important.
And this is the kind of camaraderie and partnership that builds in this, I think, what is not a very typical environment for most funder-grantee relationships. And so while I don't think it would be possible to systematically replicate the conditions under which we met, you know, I do think to myself, like, how could this space of being partners and learning together really be something that we could have more of, because I think it's been wonderful for the work we've done together. I would also say that I don't have too much to say about this, but there's a lot of recognition, I think, of power in all the things that the Kresge Foundation and Alexa do not ask us to do. And I can't even name them because we don't do them. So that is noticeable. And then finally, you know, one thing we talked about when we all met earlier was, and you referenced it, Onika, is that you know, we all have power as individuals and as organizations, and it's not necessarily inverse always or zero sum always. We can have imbalances by our role, by our positional power, by our personal identity. All of these things, of course, whether you're a national or a local organization. And so there are many venues in which, you know, Children in Nature Network also has a lot of power. You know, we're not just a grantee up here, right? And, you know, with Alexa lording over us or anything like that. And so I think this comes back to my first comment about collectivism and the connectedness that we share. And it's how we work with our other national partners, like the National League of Cities and Casey Family Programs. You know, we have financial agreements with those partners, but we share all the decision-making together. We share a collective vision. We really take a lot of time to craft that vision together. It's also about how we want to share power and grow power and emphasize others' power in our relationship with the many local communities that we work with, who are really the champions doing the work in their communities. And so how do we use our position as a national organization to add fundraising capacity, to make sure that they have funds so that they can buy the snacks, they can make sure that all the parents and all the families can be at that community engagement meeting so that children can participate. You know, these are the things that we can do with some of the power that we have in our work. And really, again, with the collectivism, if we want to see, you know, our mission is to see a world in which kids in the natural world thrive together. And so if we want to see that, we need everyone to be successful at what they're doing.
Thank you.
First thing that came to mind. So when you were talking, I was like, the Outdoor Foundation, and I'm not trying to sound like a spoiled kid, but they came and found me, which is a different dynamic, right? Where funders are actually seeking out people versus people seeking out funders. So I opened with a blessing. But then also, by the time they found me, though, I was already doing the work. And so coming back to that leveraging, and that kind of referring to what you said as well, for the Friends of Anacostia Park model, so first of all, when they contracted me in 2018 to build the organization, they knew who they were getting, right? There was no cut cards. Because the community right outside that park is Ward 7-8 residents, and they're financially and mentally stressed and all these other things. And the park was not underutilized. Like, it's 1.8 million people that use the park a year, and almost all are African American, and the culture and da-da-da. So it wasn't about that. It was about how do we leverage the existing capital in that park. Now, the ironic thing is, and I gotta be careful because now I have the executive director hat on. There's a lot of infrastructure needed in Anacostia Park that does require a fringe group to raise millions and millions of dollars around capital improvements. But it's also federal property that's been there for a long time with the issues that's been there for a while. And so we are now about to shift and start to think about that. But at the base of our group, because I know at the beginning, Tara Morrison, who's the superintendent, amazing leader, you know, her focus, her job is the park, the park, the park. But I'm also like 1.8 million people that are African American that are using your park and need these things and feel this way and have these problems, you know. So she knew me too. So we opened in the door saying, okay, yes, we're going to leverage and look for financial capital, but we're also going to leverage human capital and the social capital that already exists in this park. Because if that was the case, there's $1 trillion in Anacostia Park. Because all these people love this park. Their grandmas, they got memories with their grandmas. They had their first this. They memorialized their son. They skate. They lost weight. They got off blood pressure medicine. They rebuilt their relationship with their husband. They whatever. Like all these different experiences that are happening even without us. Which is why we also couldn't come in like, we just came in total humility of like what's already happening. And again, I've been working at Park since the 90s. So I already also gratefully leveraging again my human and my social capital in this position because what I was giving them was priceless. And I'm not bragging on myself, but they were not going to find another person with the same social capital that had in Anacostia Park. And this friends group could not be built that way and function this way without that in the fundamental leadership. So just being generous for each of us is whatever our gift is and we bring to the table. Just we cannot come at this work half-assed. Like I think we come, like I know you know what you know and believe what you do, and I believe it from all of us, But if you come half and it's not truly about the people, the human capital and that social capital, that financial capital is going to come and go every day, and that problem is going to keep cycling and reoccurring. But again, that's why I'm trying to use nature as a medium to kind of break that mold to now we're social. So the other side is too with funding too, is that there's other funders in the room for me now because we're doing like family reunification. So I can go after justice money. We can go after money that's non-traditionally at these green tables, especially around workforce development. So it's just that I'm leveraging also the diversity of our network and the needs of our community, and again, the assets of our community, and how to really bring everybody along.
Thank you.
It's a conversation.
I can't follow Akiima. No, when I think about privilege, I hope you all take away from this conversation that privilege and power exists all throughout the philanthropic network. Whether you're a small startup nonprofit, you're an intermediary funder, you are a family private foundation, there's power and privilege that exists at all levels and at all parts of the philanthropic system. And how we leverage that, I think, is what's most important, right? Power exists regardless. Privilege exists regardless. It's not a bad thing, right? Like I've often done DEI trainings and folks are like, well, I'm not to blame for my privilege. No, you're not. How you use that privilege and how you use that power, I think, is really critical. Coming from the nonprofit side and just kind of pulling on some of those experiences, and as Akiima shared, there are funders that can be overly prescriptive. I remember distinctly an interaction with a funder that had approached an organization that I was co-leading, and they said that they came to us, but they were like, we want to give you this funding, but here's exactly how we need you to do this program. And we know you've been around for 20 years plus, but here's how we want you to do this programming based on the science and research and everything that we've done in this space. And we were in a position as an organization, we had applied, we tried to work within their parameters, but we said this is our model, and this is the model that works for us, works for our community, that's been informed and developed by community. And we had a pretty tense phone call when we submitted our letter of intent. They were like, well, this wasn't what we asked. We respectfully declined that grant. There is so much privilege in, no applause needed. There's so much privilege in the ability to say no and to give feedback back to funders that only some organizations can really fully do. If you are a medium to larger size nonprofit that enjoys a direct relationship, a powerful relationship with your funding partners, please share that feedback, right? So that we know how to improve our practices and do better. Another kind of ill in philanthropy is often the overly prescriptive requirements, and they they exist for many reasons, right? Especially in, as intermediary funders, Children in Nature Network is an intermediary funder, right? We serve in this kind of interesting go-between where we both receive funding from external sources, from outdoor industry, from private foundations and so forth, and then we're re-granting that funding as well. And so we have requirements that we kind of have to pass down or pass through, but we also serve in that position of power and privilege where we can also go back to those that fund us and say, hey, this is really what we're hearing from the ground. But you only know that if you're in relationship with the communities that you're serving, the organizations that you're serving, and actively getting that feedback. So having that relationship, having those direct conversations. I'm grateful for folks like Akiima. Before I came into the role, or as soon as I knew about the role, I said, Akiima, coming into this role, I need your support. And she's given it to me, right? Has given me the opportunity to listen. She's given me critical feedback. And we have that trust-based relationship where we're able to talk through things, soundboard. We had our board meeting out in collaboration with Thrive Outside DC, and had an amazing experience where our board just got to sit and be in community with.
I'm so sorry.
Take it away.
He brought a pack of funders to Anacostia Park. And all we did was what we do every day. Like, again, I don't want to sound like a spoiled child that's bragging, but how powerful that is. You've done the same thing. Like, you've brought the Blue Sky funders down into the park. And what that does for them to have that first-hand experience, what it does for my core. And again, we're not singing, song, and dancing it. We're just doing what we do every day. And so it feels so natural. And I'm so glad this is a new norm. Because again, what I was raised in, the funder, and I couldn't talk to the funder directly. But I'm the biggest dancer. You know what I mean? So it's just, I appreciate that though, because I've lived on to see the change, and it definitely, there's been a shift, and I think it's amazing to have such, I'm sorry, you said the chief was modernized. Yeah. Well, that maybe doesn't fit here, but just like people who community responsive power holders.
Yeah.
The gatekeepers that aren't like.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such an important point. Priya mentioned how Priya and I met. I had applied for a $5,000 grant to start that work, where it was like, during the pandemic, I was like half furloughed at work. I had a young kid. I was like, what can I do? I had this idea, like, why don't we use our parks as outdoor classrooms? And then we could just do it forever, right? Like we trick everyone in the pandemic. And I, ended up meeting this teacher in Dearborn, and we were just trying to figure out, who's a principal who let us do this? And I was like, yeah, I have materials, money, right? And then it kind of grew into this thing. But I do just less appreciate your point about, I'm not recommending this to get anyone in trouble with a funder who's like, bang, bang, tell me all the things. But what I've realized being on this side of things is not to excuse all funders, but there's a huge information gap, right? When I worked at the public sector, no one held back on me what wasn't working. I knew everything, every pothole, a bus was late, you hear it all. Most people don't want to tell their funders that for good reason, because they are trying to get funded. I've realized things that, as a grantee, I was like, why would they fund that? I was like, they had no idea, right? They were operating in such a vacuum of information and maybe didn't have those relationships on the ground, that not to maybe lead with that with a new funder, but where you build that trust to offer that reflection back about or hey, you laid it out and this part was great, but the fact that you didn't let me buy snacks led to all these other problems, right? If you can begin to build that trust of actually giving the funders feedback about what's working. I mean, I don't really ask. I don't know. My grant requirements are tell me what happened and what you learned. But yeah, it is a shift, and where you can find it, I think you can really fix systems a lot faster, where you can figure out those two-way channels. Because also philanthropy just isn't that accountable as a sector, right? You have a board. If you have a live billionaire funder, you just have a person, right? There's beyond the IRS saying you have to spend just 5% of your endowment a year. That's it, right? maybe it's a project that's bad or doing harm to the community unintentionally. Like, there's no real accountability. I mean, I think funders could do a lot more to be accountable and figure out ways, but where you have trust, I think it's worth being like, hey, this didn't work, not because we're bad or failed, but because there was an obstacle. Systems were hard. We actually learned something entirely new that we didn't know at the start of this. Is really, really important where you can find space to do that.
Thank you so much for that. I think that whole idea around how to hold funders accountable to community is something that is still, I think that Kresge and Outdoor Foundation have really thought deeply about that. But I'm wondering, what are the ways as grantees, sitting in the grantee seat, what are those ways, those mechanisms by which, other than straight talk, which is a great way in if you have that relationship, what are some other ways that we might think about creating those feedback loops, which end up becoming the basis for accountability? What are some ways that we can think about that, or if you've experienced that, or you've wished that that can happen? I mean, some ideas have been advisory councils, or bringing on members of the community onto family foundation boards. Are there mechanisms that you've seen working or that you feel might not be working as well as you would like?
So because my network's a little non-traditional, they're not people sitting in offices, they're people on the ground, they're people that lost their kids. So they're motivated. Our goal are actual events. Like, the meetings happen, but I don't plan around meetings. I call them call-ins. So that network that already existed, when I started having Thrive and having these unique partners in the park and opportunities to sit with moms, like, if you ever want, so again, if you don't have a relationship with this community, you can come to Anacostia Park and meet somebody. You could play Uno, da-da-da. So I call them call-ins. So every time we have an event, it's an opportunity for you to come. I'm smoking people out on the slide. Because if it's been a year and you still ain't come out, what does that say? You could have called in 27 times. So I try to, and I'm not trying to say I'm doing this to trick people either, but I'm trying to, I look at them, we build a certain number of call-ins that I know that we as Friends of Anacostia Park as a backbone organization are going to already have. So like our late skates and the senior respite, da-da-da. And so I know 27. So then this network, I go, hey guys, 27 chances to work together this year. What's up? And then they'll either come or not. And I get it. People are busy. They have their own calendars. Sometimes we try to coordinate and cross or whatever. But the call-ins, because at the end of the day, that gives me whatever questions I want to ask. There's 27 times I would have seen people specifically, things I could have measured. I'm getting better about measuring things and what to measure. But also, again, I'm also being able to smoke out who's not at the table and the whys. And we haven't got to that point yet of Thrive, but as we establish these networks, the people that show up are going to show you who's doing it. Period, the end. We don't need to have any more meetings, any more committees, any more advisories. Like, one more chance for people to not show up for you. Just have the actual things. Call-ins, that's what I call them.
Thank you.
I mean, ditto that. We have opportunities as a Thrive Outside network to convene on a regular basis, to share best practices, to get feedback. But the most valuable feedback that I've received since my time are texts from Akiima first thing in the morning. Hey, this is what happened. The 3-year-old was shot down the street from Anacostia Park this week. Or, hey, we just had this amazing late night skate. Here's some pictures about it. Or the conversations that we have in hallways, or the phone calls that we have just saying, hey, I'm trying to figure this thing out. We're trying to advance this equity thing within our region, and we're getting intense pushback and feedback from folks that are saying this is reverse racism. Can we talk about this? All of that only happens, though, if you're able to build trust, right? Relationships move at the speed of trust is a common saying of a dear friend of mine, Room Map of Outdoor Afro. She often says that, building that trust, being consistent. I'm very careful not to promise things that I can't promise, and to share some of the challenges that I'm experiencing also as an intermediary funder, and some of the ways that we're thinking through things. So just having those open, honest conversations and building that relationship, that rapport, is what opens up that feedback loop.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, and I'm sure that you are filled with questions. I still have a number on my piece of paper right now that I wish I could share. But sometimes we need to sit with those questions and live with those questions, and the answers will come to us at some point in time. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for the ways that you have helped us all as, no matter what side of the fence that we end up being, and it's not a fence, it's a spectrum. It's a field that we're moving through all the time, depending on which conversation we're having with which person. But I think all of us can leave with the real deep understanding that those of us who are seeking funding, who feel like we don't necessarily have that economic power, have an intense amount of power, of community, of leadership, of understanding and lived experience that funders need to hear and really understand. So please make yourself available. Find out ways that you can interact with organizations like Blue Sky and other organizations and other funders. Please be heard and do that in community. And then for our funders, again, there's a wealth of power that lie within communities. You know that, or else you wouldn't be funding them, right? Think about those ways that we can start to unpack and dismantle those barriers, the way one of our members of Blue Sky Outdoor Foundation has done, the way Kresge has been doing for years, and Lex has been doing in our 2 years. It's a really important part of the way that we build this mechanism to build a trust-based movement together. So thank you so much for the work that you've done, and applause, folks, for all people.